He said he was wearing his father's shoes. He said his father had died in them. He said his father had been on a stage just like this one, when it happened. Mid-sentence, mid-laugh, mid-everything. He looked down at his own feet, and the camera found them. Old dress shoes, worn at the toe. Clearly too large for a 19-year-old still growing into his father's size. Simon Cowell looked at those shoes. He looked at them for a long moment. And then Simon Cowell, for the first time in 15 seasons, before a single note had been sung, before the formal judging had even begun, broke down. Another Tuesday night taping. The Pasadena Civic Auditorium, packed with 3,000 people. Cameras rolling. Millions watching from home. Another hopeful contestant stepping into the spotlight. Simon Cowell sat at the judge's table in his black shirt, arms crossed, that familiar expression of prepared attention in place. He was ready. He was not ready. The boy who walked out that night was 19 years old. His name was Marcus Webb. He was from Nashville, Tennessee. He was broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with a jaw that had recently arrived at its adult shape and a stillness about him that had nothing to do with calm. It was the stillness of someone carrying a weight so familiar they had stopped noticing they were carrying it, until a moment like this, when they put it on a stage and suddenly everyone could see. He wore a dark suit jacket over a white shirt, and shoes that were a size too large. Terry Crews offered a handshake. "Marcus, welcome. You look like a young man who means business." "I hope so," Marcus said. "I've been working up to tonight for a while. Tell us about yourself." "I'm 19. From Nashville. I'm a comedian." A pause. "Or I'm trying to be." The audience responded warmly. Howie Mandel sat up straighter with visible interest. Heidi Klum smiled. Sofia Vergara leaned in. Simon remained still. "Comedy," Terry said. "That's brave on this stage. Who inspired you?" Marcus looked at his hands for a moment, then back up. "My dad," he said. "He was a comedian. Club circuit, Nashville, Memphis, Atlanta, wherever they'd have him. Not famous, but good." He stopped. "He died 18 months ago. He was 46 years old." He paused again. He was on stage when it happened, mid-set. Cardiac arrest. He was in the middle of a bit he'd been workshopping for 6 months. A pause so small it was almost nothing. He never got to the punchline. The room shifted in the way rooms shift when something very specific and very terrible has been said plainly. Not the generalized sadness of loss, the particular image-sharp sadness of a man dying mid-sentence in front of an audience who didn't understand yet what they were witnessing. Sofia Vergara pressed both hands flat on the table. Heidi Klum's jaw tightened. Howie Mandel, the comedian on the panel, looked down at the desk and stayed there for a moment. Simon Cowell's face did something it had never done in this moment of this show. Before the performance, before the story was fully told, before he had any professional reason to respond at all, his composure fractured. Just briefly, just visibly, in the way things fracture when the pressure exceeds the structure by exactly one thing too many. He pressed his hand to his mouth. He looked away from the boy toward the side of the stage. He looked back. His eyes were bright, and the brightness was not television brightness. He broke down before a note was sung. He collected himself in the space of several seconds that felt much longer. He lowered his hand. He breathed. He looked at Marcus Webb steadily. "I'm sorry," he said. "Go on." Marcus nodded. He looked down at his feet. "I'm wearing his shoes," he said. "He was wearing them that night. They gave them back to us with the rest of his things. They're a size too big for me." He paused. "I stuffed the toes. A beat. I'm going to grow into them." The auditorium broke open. There is no other way to describe it. 3,000 people, and the sound they made was a kind of collective undoing. Simon Cowell stood up. He did not walk around the judge's table. He simply stood. He pressed his hands flat on the table and he pushed back his chair, and he stood straight and looked at this 19-year-old boy in his dead father's shoes, and he stood there. Howie was the next to stand, slowly, out of a respect that one performer owes another across the distance of decades. Heidi stood. Sophia stood. The four of them behind the judge's table, standing, before a single note. To understand what Simon felt in that moment, what specifically had fractured before anything else, you need to understand what had happened 18 months earlier. Simon Cowell had been in Nashville on a Tuesday in March for a series of label meetings running across 2 days. His assistant, who curated his evenings in unfamiliar cities with quiet efficiency, had put a suggestion in his schedule for Tuesday night. A small comedy showcase at a club downtown. An early set. Something to do between dinner and the hotel. Simon went. He watched one act from a seat near the back. A woman doing observational material. Competent, occasionally sharp. Finished his drink. Decided he was tired. Decided he had an early start. Decided it was fine to leave. He put on his jacket. He walked out into the Nashville night, which was cool and clear and smelled of the river. And he got into the car and went back to the hotel. He was in his room by 10:30. He ordered tea. He read for an hour. He went to sleep. He learned the next morning from his assistant, who had seen a brief item in a local news feed, that a comedian had collapsed and died at a different club across town. Same night. Different venue. 2 miles, maybe 3. The man had been mid-performance, mid-set, mid-sentence, mid-laugh. His name was Anthony Webb. He was 46 years old. The audience had thought at first it was part of the act. Simon had noted it the way a person notes a tragedy that has no direct connection to their life, with a moment of genuine sorrow, and then the movement back to the next thing, because that is how the days work, when the days are full. He had not thought about it again. He had no reason to, until 3 weeks ago, when a 19-year-old named Marcus Webb submitted an audition video from Nashville, Tennessee, and the accompanying materials mentioned his father's name, and Simon's assistant flagged it and asked whether Simon wanted to be briefed before the taping. Simon read the brief. He sat with it. He thought about a Tuesday night in March and a hotel room, and the particular cruelty of proximity without presence, being in the same city, on the same night, while something irreversible was happening 2 miles away. He had been in Nashville the night Anthony Webb died. He had gone home and read a book and gone to sleep. He had not known. He had no reason to have known, but he had been there, in the city, breathing the same air, close enough that it felt now like the kind of thing that should have registered somehow, even though it couldn't have, even though that wasn't how the world worked. He came to the taping carrying that. He thought he had processed it in the 3 weeks since the briefing. He was wrong about that. He thought the moment of impact would be the performance. It was not. It was the shoes. He thought that was where the weight of the thing lived, until tonight, until the camera found a pair of dress shoes stuffed at the toe to fit a foot that hadn't grown into them yet, until he understood in one involuntary rush that Anthony Webb had died in those shoes, and his son had walked onto this stage in them, and that the walking was the bravest thing he had seen in 15 seasons. Simon walked around the judge's table. He crossed to the stage. He stepped up. He walked toward Marcus Webb, who stood at the microphone and did not step back. Simon stopped a few feet away. He looked at the boy for a moment. Then he said, "Walk toward me." Marcus looked at him. The auditorium was completely silent. Marcus Webb walked toward Simon Cowell. Slowly, in his father's shoes, which were a size too large, which he had stuffed at the toes with folded newspaper that morning in the hotel room, which had been on a stage in Nashville 18 months ago on a Tuesday night, when a man had stood in them and started a sentence he didn't finish. He walked the length of the stage toward Simon. 12 steps. 14. Each one deliberate and unhurried, the shoes making a sound on the stage floor that was slightly off, slightly too heavy, slightly too wide, the sound of someone walking in another person's life. Simon watched every step. When Marcus reached him, Simon looked at him for a long moment without speaking. He looked at his face. He looked at the shoes. He looked at his face again. He would have been proud of this walk, Simon said. His voice was not entirely steady. He did not try to make it steadier. Every step of it. Marcus Webb looked at him and said nothing. He didn't need to say anything. He had walked the length of the stage in his father's shoes, and there was nothing left to say before the singing. Simon stepped aside. Marcus went back to the microphone. Share this story if it moved you. Subscribe so you never miss moments like these. The audience was already standing. Had been standing since Simon stood, all 3,000, in a room that understood it was present at something that would outlast the evening. Marcus Webb stood at the microphone, and he did a thing that comedians do not do on talent competition stages. He told a joke, his father's joke. The bit Anthony Webb had been workshopping for 6 months. The one he never got to the punchline of. Marcus had found it in his father's notes, a yellow legal pad covered in handwriting, the structure of the bit laid out in bullet points, the punchline circled twice at the bottom. He told it from the beginning. He took his time. He built it exactly as his father had built it, because he had watched his father work the material in the kitchen 100 times, testing the rhythm of it against a dishwasher audience of 1. He had his father's timing, his father's pause before the turn, his father's way of leaning into the moment just before the release. He hit the punchline. The auditorium laughed, the full, unguarded laugh that comedy aims at and rarely hits perfectly. Not polite laughter, not the appreciative laughter of an audience being encouraging, but the real thing, laughter that arrives before you've decided to laugh, because the thing was genuinely, honestly funny. And then the laughter became something else, because the people in that room understood what they had just done. They had given Anthony Webb his punchline 18 months late, through his son, on the largest stage either of them had ever stood on. That is a thing the world does not often allow. A second chance at the ending. A room full of strangers willing to be the audience a man never got. The laughter became the other thing that laughter sometimes becomes when it hits the boundary of something enormous. It became the sound a room makes when it is holding too many feelings at once and can only let them out through the nearest opening. Simon Cowell pressed the golden buzzer. Gold confetti fell. Marcus Webb stood in the center of the stage in his father's shoes and looked up at the falling gold and let it fall. He was still a size too small for the shoes. He was working on it. In the weeks that followed, Simon made a private donation in Anthony Webb's name to a Nashville fund that supports the families of working comedians who die without significant life insurance, which is most of them. Because the club circuit does not come with benefits. He did not publicize it. He told no one except the fund's director. He also, for the first time in his career, put a comedian through to the live shows without requiring them to sing a single note. The shoes sit on a shelf in Marcus Webb's apartment in Nashville. He does not perform in them. They are for the walk to the stage only, the moment of arrival, the last steps before the lights. He puts them on in the wings and walks out, and then changes into his own shoes for the set itself. They are still a size too large. He is still growing. Some shoes were broken in by someone else. They carry the shape of a life you didn't live. The calluses, the creases, the particular wear of a person who walked differently than you do, who stood differently, who carried their weight in a different place. When you wear them, you are not pretending to be that person. You are carrying them forward. You are saying, I know where these have been. I know what they cost. And I am going to walk somewhere in them that they never got to go.